The year was 1879. The sun hung low in the Arizona sky, painting the canyons in streaks of gold and crimson. The land was silent except for the soft wind stirring the dust and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. A lone rider moved across the harsh terrain, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the parched earth. Jackson Cole, once a Union scout and now a wandering soul, had seen more of life than most men ever would. His horse was tired, just like him, but it kept moving with the rhythm of a creature that had no choice. Jackson had no home, no destination, only a past full of loss and a future he hadn't yet dared to imagine. As he rode through Apache territory, Jackson kept his eyes sharp. The desert was beautiful, yes, but also dangerous. He had dealt with bandits, mountain lions, and soldiers who had long forgotten the meaning of honor. But that evening, it wasn't any of those things that stopped him in his tracks. It was a scream, high-pitched, desperate, a woman's scream echoing off the rocks carried by the dry wind. Jackson reacted instantly. He turned his horse toward the sound, his rifle already in his hand. As he reached a dried-out creek bed lined with thorny mesquite trees, he saw them. Two white men, rough-looking trappers with cruel eyes, cornering a young Apache woman. Her clothes were torn, her face smeared with dirt and blood. She held a small knife in her hand, but it was clear she wouldn't last much longer. "Step away from her!" Jackson shouted, rifle raised. The men turned, startled. One of them laughed. "Ain't your business, stranger." Jackson fired. The bullet struck the taller man in the chest, sending him backward with a grunt. The second one fumbled for his pistol, but Jackson was faster. The crack of the second shot echoed louder than the first. The silence that followed was deafening. The woman stood motionless, staring at him. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but she didn't run. Her eyes, dark as midnight, locked onto his. Jackson lowered his rifle and approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "Are you all right?" She didn't answer. Blood trickled down her arm from a gash just below her shoulder. Jackson took off his coat and offered it to her. After a long pause, she reached out and took it. "My name's Jackson," he added, kneeling to examine her wound. "You need help." Still, she said nothing, but she didn't stop him either. He cleaned the cut as best he could, using water from his canteen and a strip from his shirt. She winced but didn't cry out. There was strength in her silence. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, he built a small fire and offered her jerky from his saddlebag. She ate slowly, watching him with the same intensity. "What's your name?" he asked, not expecting a reply. After a long moment, she whispered, "Nayeli." It was the first time he heard her voice, soft, musical, and full of something he couldn't quite place. Sorrow, maybe, or strength. "Nayeli," he repeated, nodding. "That's a beautiful name." She nodded once and looked away. The fire cracked between them, casting flickering shadows. Neither spoke for a while, but something had shifted. A silent understanding formed, like a thread spun by the desert wind. That night, Jackson stayed awake while she slept. He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter meant more than he understood. The next morning, as the sun rose, painting the desert in orange light, Nayeli spoke again. "My home is 2 days from here, in the east. Will you take me?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "Yes, I will." And so they rode, two strangers brought together by fate. Along the way, she spoke little, but Jackson learned more from her silences than most could say in words. She was the daughter of a shaman, she told him. She had gone alone to gather healing herbs for her people when the men attacked. Her tribe, she said, did not usually welcome outsiders. "I'll just get you home safe," Jackson promised. "That's all I came for." But when they finally reached her village, it became clear that this journey was far from over. The moment they approached, Apache warriors appeared from behind trees and boulders. Arrows were drawn, spears were raised. Jackson reached for his rifle but stopped when Nayeli held up her hand. She spoke to them rapidly in her native tongue. At first, the warriors didn't lower their weapons. Then an elder stepped forward. A tall man with deep lines etched into his weathered face, wearing a cloak of feathers and bone. Nayeli spoke to him for a long time. Jackson couldn't understand, but he could feel the weight of every word. The elder listened with narrowed eyes, occasionally glancing at Jackson. Then finally, he stepped forward. "You saved my daughter's life," he said in slow but clear English. "You did not hurt her. You brought her home with honor. The spirits have chosen you." Jackson frowned. "What do you mean, chosen?" The old man lifted a feather, red with paint, and placed it in Jackson's hand. "You are now her sacred husband," the elder said solemnly. "Not by law of men, but by law of the ancestors." Jackson blinked, stunned. I didn't ask for this. I was only doing what was right." The elder nodded. "And that is why the spirits chose you." Nayeli stood beside her father, silent. Then she turned to Jackson, her voice soft but certain. "In our belief, the one who saves the soul of a woman is tied to her forever." Jackson opened his mouth to speak, but found he had no words. The warriors lowered their weapons. The tribe began to chant softly in the distance. And Jackson Cole, drifter, loner, soldier without a home, stood in the heart of a people who now called him something sacred. But what did that mean for a man who had nothing left to give? And what would happen when the past he tried to outrun finally caught up to him? Jackson Cole stood in the middle of the Apache village, holding the red-painted feather in his hand, still unsure if what he'd just heard was real. Around him, voices murmured, and drums began to beat low and steady, like the rhythm of an ancient heart. He looked at Nayeli, who stood with grace and calm beside her father. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes held something he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not sorrow, but hope. "I'm not her husband," Jackson said hesitantly. "Not in the way you mean." The shaman stepped closer, his face carved by wisdom and war. "Not by paper or priest, but by fire, by the path you walked to reach her. You didn't come for glory, you came with honor. That is the marriage our ancestors bless." Jackson wanted to argue, wanted to say he wasn't that man, but deep down he knew he hadn't felt this kind of peace in years. These people weren't judging him for his past. They saw only what he did for Nayeli. Still, it didn't make sense. "I've done things," Jackson muttered. "I've killed men. I've run from my past. I ain't a sacred anything." "You are now," the shaman said simply. Nayeli stepped forward. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, a simple gesture, but it felt like lightning through his veins. "You do not need to believe in the spirits," she said softly, "but they believe in you." That night, they gave him a place to sleep. Not far from Nayeli's home, near a fire, surrounded by people who once would have seen him as a threat. He didn't sleep much. He stared at the stars and thought about how strange life was, how one moment could drag a man from death's doorstep and plant him in a future he never imagined. The next few days passed in a haze of healing and ritual. The tribe treated him as an honored guest. The children ran around him with laughter, the warriors nodded in respect, and the women brought him food laced with sweet herbs. And Nayeli, she was always near, quiet, thoughtful, and watching him with the same intensity that never faded from her eyes. They sat together by the river one evening, watching the water rush over smooth stones. Jackson skipped a rock across the surface, then said, "Do you believe in this sacred bond they talk about?" Nayeli didn't answer right away. She plucked a flower from a nearby bush and held it in her palm. "My mother used to say that the spirit chooses only once in a lifetime," she said. "Not because it's perfect, but because it's true." He looked at her. "Do you think I'm the one it chose?" "I think," she said with a small smile. "You wouldn't still be here if you didn't feel it too." He didn't respond, but her words settled in his chest like warm coals. That night, while most of the tribe slept, trouble came. A group of bounty hunters rode in. 6 men, hard-faced and armed to the teeth. They weren't looking for friendship. They were looking for Jackson. He saw them approach from the edge of the woods. Their leader, a man named Bryce Cutter, called, "Out Jackson Cole, we know you're here. You got a price on your head back in Texas. You shot a land baron's son 3 years ago. Time to pay up." Jackson stepped forward slowly, unarmed. "That boy you're talking about tried to hang a black family just for crossing his land. I'd do it again." "You'll die either way," Cutter sneered. "Come quietly or we'll burn this place to ash." Behind Jackson, Apache warriors gathered, bows drawn and ready, but Jackson raised a hand. "I'll go," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "You don't need to shed blood for me." Nayeli's voice cut through the air. "No!" She stepped in front of him. "If you take him, you make war with us." One of the bounty hunters scoffed. "We don't fear Indians." "You should," said the shaman as he approached, eyes like storm clouds. "But not because we fight with weapons. We fight with truth." The air grew still. Then the shaman raised both hands and began to chant. The wind picked up, swirling dust into the firelight. The warriors stood like statues. Even the bounty hunters hesitated, some out of fear, some out of confusion. That's when Jackson made his move. In the flash, he grabbed the rifle off the nearest man and fired. Chaos erupted. Arrows flew from the shadows. Bullets rang in the night. The Apache fought like ghosts, striking from every angle. Jackson took down 2 men himself, fighting not for survival, but for something deeper, for her. When it was over, 4 bounty hunters were dead. The other 2 ran, screaming into the darkness. The village stood silent, heavy with smoke and sweat. Jackson stood breathing hard, blood on his shirt, but alive. Nayeli walked up to him, not with fear, but with pride. "You didn't run," she whispered. "Not this time," he said. The shaman approached and placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "Now," he said, "you are truly hers." In the weeks that followed, Jackson stayed, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as Nayeli's true companion. He learned their ways, their language, their ceremonies. He worked beside the men, hunted with the warriors, and held Nayeli's hand beneath the moonlight. One evening they sat by the same river again. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "What do we call this?" he asked. She smiled. "We don't need to call it anything. The earth already knows." And in that moment, Jackson Cole, a man once lost in dust and silence, knew he had found something no bounty hunter could ever take from him. A home, a future, a sacred love written not by law or legend, but by the wind, the fire, and the heartbeat of the land.